All right, let's go to the guest line. Let's bring on the longtime voice of the NC State Wolfpack, Mr. Gary Hahn. Gary, how we doing up there the night before this big Thursday night event in Carter Finley Stadium?
We just finished dinner, so we feel pretty good.
Well, I mean,
there's a lot of excitement. We're excited about this ball game. It's not every week that you get the National College Football Spotlight on Carter Finley Stadium in Raleigh, North Carolina. So I think everybody's pretty jacked up about that.
And is there a big anticipation? Because, A, it's the first big game in a rookie head coach in Dave Dorn. Also, look at the last couple of years. You knock off Florida State at home last season. You knock off a 7th-ranked Clemson team 2 years ago. Like Dave Dorn has said this week, it's not out of the realm of possibility because it's been proven that NC State can upset top 10 teams in Raleigh.
Yeah, but those teams were a little bit different than the one he has now. And, of course, this is a new coaching staff. Now, some of those guys did play in that game a couple of years ago, but they probably didn't play much because they would have had to have been probably freshmen at that time against Clemson. I think the game you got to go back to is the game last year down at Memorial Stadium where Clemson rang up 62 points against NC State. Now, a lot of the guys who are going to play in this game played in that game. And that's the one that I'm hanging my hat on. Now, State was able to score most of the time enough points to win. They scored in the 40s, but that wasn't enough against the Clemson team when Taj Boyd did about anything he wanted to do. He ran for 103 yards and 3 touchdowns. He threw for about 425 and 5 more and set an ACC record with 8 touchdowns. So that's what's got to change. Taj Boyd just can't do whatever he wanted to do like he did last year in this ball game, or it's going to be a long night for NC State.
Now, Gary, what have you been, as the voice of the Wolfpack, what have you been able to learn or figure out about this particular Wolfpack team? I mean, you're 2 games into Dave Dorn's career at NC State. You've already lost 1 starting quarterback. You have another one in Pete Thomas. It's a transfer from Colorado State. I mean, what can you take away from these first 2 games as the voice of the NC State Wolfpack?
Well, I think the team competed well. I mean, they were down by, I think it was 11 points to Richmond and came back to win. And there were times last year when this team just would have folded up. It either had a devastating loss and then didn't show up the next week, like it loses to North Carolina last year, and then the next week it doesn't show up for Virginia, a game that arguably it should have won. And there were some other instances last year. And I think Dave Dorn and his staff, these guys are high-energy teachers. They've come in. They've changed the culture. They've got these guys competing. I think they've got them believing in what they're trying to do now since they're 2-0. That kind of helps. And I think they know that Coach Dorn is a guy who is a player's coach and who cares about them and who cares about them not only as football players but as people. I think he's been able to prove that so far. And I think probably 95% of these guys are really trying to bust it for Dave Dorn right now. If this team competes and plays up to its capabilities, it may have a chance in this ball game against Clemson, especially if some things happen, like if you get off to a good start. I think that's critical for State in this game. I mean, something good's got to happen for NC State early to kind of elevate the level of play. When you're playing Clemson, I mean, you got to play probably above your capabilities in order to win. And I think something needs to happen early in the game. But if it doesn't, you got to keep grinding. You got to keep competing. And trying to slow Clemson down, I think, is going to be very, very tough to do. You got to keep that Clemson offense somehow in 3rd down and long, and rather have Taj Boyd throw the ball than get out of the pocket and run the ball. Because to me, Taj Boyd reminds me of just a bigger Russell Wilson. And trying to control Russell Wilson was murder for ACC teams that didn't have an NC State uniform on. And Taj Boyd is a lot the same way, and how he goes, that's how the Clemson offense goes. And so far, the first 2 games has been very good, averaging 45 points and almost 500 yards a game. So Taj Boyd is the big key offensively, and defensively. That Clemson defense, man, I was impressed with that pass rush that they were able to put on Georgia, and also against South Carolina State. I mean, that front 7 for Clemson is for real, and somehow, some way, I don't know what the game plan is, but I would think that State is going to have to keep them off balance and they're going to have to be able to run the football some. And that's something State has been able to do under Dave Doran. That's one of the new things. You asked me some of the changes. Well, that's one thing. There's been an emphasis on running the football. Unfortunately, State doesn't have an offensive line that is as good as the one as it had last year, but it's growing, and hopefully it will continue to mature, and hopefully it'll be play a pretty good game in this one coming up. So we'll see.
We're talking with Gary Hahn, the longtime voice of the NC State Wolfpack here on Straight Up with Sturge on Clemson's flagship station. Gary, have they had to, you look at Pete Thomas, he's listed at 6'6", 235 pounds. Have they had to maybe scale back a little bit of what Coach Doran likes to do because he doesn't really fit the mold of what you've seen of quarterbacks in the past at Northern Illinois and things of that nature?
Well, he's got a two-pronged approach. I mean, Pete Thomas is more of a pocket passer, although he does mobility. He can run the ball. He does not as good as a runner as Brandon Mitchell, who was injured in the first game, who was the starting quarterback for NC State, and then broke his foot. So, you got to change things a little bit. But Bryant Sheriffs is a true freshman out of Jefferson, Georgia, and he can run the football. So they've been bringing him in as the Wildcat quarterback. He can also throw. And so now you got two guys you can worry about. And in the first game, they brought in Josh Taylor, who's a true freshman out of New Bern, who's a walk-on. He saw action for 9 snaps against Louisiana Tech. So you got 3 different guys you can go to. So it's almost like quarterback by committee. But obviously Pete Thomas has the most college experience because he started 2 years at Colorado State and was the starter there. But when he came to NC State, Tom O'Brien was the head coach, and they had a drop-back passing type game. And now all of a sudden they don't. It's a completely different type of offense. And so Dave Doran, when Mitchell went out, he went to plan B, and now it's basically Sheriffs and Thomas. And it doesn't matter how many guys do it as long as they get the job done. And State's committed to run the football, whether it's with the quarterback or the running backs like Creasy or the freshman Matt Days or Shadrack Thornton, who's a Georgia native who played last year and was State's leading rusher with almost 700 yards. So all of those guys are back, got some depth at running back, have some depth at wide receiver. The offensive line, though, is probably at this point not as good as it was last year, and that's a big concern when you're going up against the Clemson defense with that good front seven.
All right, one final question for you, Gary. We appreciate you taking time to join us here on the eve of the game. What are some things Clemson fans should watch for on defense with NC State? I've actually been impressed with the defensive backs. Clemson got Mike Reed, the old NC State defensive backs coach. But, that it's defense that kind of kept you in the game to allow you to make that comeback last week against Richmond. So what are some things Clemson fans should watch for on that Wolfpack defense?
Well, the defensive line is deep, and it's fairly talented. And it's going to have to be because the Clemson offensive line is very experienced and averages, better than 300 pounds. But I feel that matchup is a pretty decent matchup. We'll see. But the Pack's linebackers, I think that's the group to watch. The linebackers and the safeties. I think Justin Burris and Dante Johnson at corner are pretty good. But Hakeem Jones and Jarvis Byrd, they're first-year starters. And Byrd, this will be his third start coming up since November 2009. He was out for a long time with 2 knee injuries. He's come back. He looks very, very good. He's played good so far. But, again, he's not as experienced as the guys that were there last year who both went to the NFL, or at least one of them, Earl Wolf, did. So that's a concern. And the linebackers last year, State just didn't get the kind of linebacker play that it needed. And 2 of State's 3 starting linebackers for the ball game coming up played no snaps at linebacker last year, Robert Caldwell and DJ Green. Green was suspended. He played the year before. But Robert Caldwell was a special teams player for the most part last year. And Brandon Pittman is a 2-year starter. So the Pack has to get better linebacker play against a very, very explosive Clemson Tiger team. And all of these guys on defense are going to have to be able to tackle in space. Because if you can't, 5-yard hitch or whatever goes for 20 or 30 yards or maybe for a touchdown. I mean, Clemson's that explosive. You see these guys every week. You know that. I mean, Sammy Watkins has got another speed gear. Bryant's an excellent receiver. Humphreys is a good possession receiver, and they're getting it done. And they've got backs who are explosive runners too. So that's one thing I think that you need to be watching for: how well the Pack is able to tackle in space, what kind of linebacker play they get, and if they can somehow put Clemson in some predictable down and distance situations where Taj Boyd has got to stay in the pocket and throw.
Well, Gary, we appreciate your time tonight. Good luck on the call tomorrow night, and I hope Raleigh's an electric atmosphere because these two teams, it's been a great Textile Bowl rivalry over the past. As I was preparing to do something, I worked with Coach Danny Ford on a project during the game, Gary, and I was doing my homework. It hit me. Between 86 and 88, Clemson won all 3 ACC championships, yet never beat NC State over that 3-year period.
Yeah, unfortunately, though, that doesn't go forward into this ball game.
That's right. That's right.
I sure wish it did.
So, well, best of luck tomorrow night, Gary. As always, we appreciate your time here on Straight Up with Sturge.
Okay, glad to be with you, and hopefully it'll be loud because Clemson's got that no-huddle offense, and maybe the crowd can disrupt the Tigers' communication line somehow.
There you go.
Good to be with you.
All right. Well, thank you much. Appreciate it, as always. Gary Hahn.